Have you ever had an idea that seemed perfect? This thing should happen. Unfortunately, no one else shared your vision. Sometimes an idea is worth working toward anyway. Some ideas take years to bring into reality, and some people are persistent enough to keep trying. A lady named Eliza Scidmore was one of those people, and her idea took nearly 30 years to implement. During that 30 years, she recruited help from all sorts of people across the Department of Agriculture, a First Lady of the United States, and even the government of Japan. What did she finally succeed in doing after all those years? The planting of thousands of flowering cherry trees in the Potomac River Tidal Basin in Washington, D.C. You are listening to Plant Connection. Life today can feel overwhelming, like we've drifted away from its natural rhythm. This podcast is your space to slow down, breathe, and rediscover the peace and clarity that come from reconnecting with the natural world. I'm your host, Lisa Cutshaw. Let's reconnect, one plant at a time. I have to admit, I have always heard the abbreviated version of this story, the one where the U.S. government planted these flowering cherry trees in 1912 because they were a gift from the Japanese government. But there's a lot more to it than that. Eliza's efforts began in 1885, after her first visit to Japan. She was from Washington, D.C., but was visiting her brother, who was there working for the U.S. consulate. When she got back to D.C., she suggested planting the newly reclaimed waterfront area in Potomac Park with flowering cherries. Certain varieties of flowering cherry were already becoming fashionable in Western Europe as early as the late 1870s, and interest in Japanese culture was beginning to grow, but by and large, the tree and the larger culture were still to be discovered by most Americans. So in 1885, it was not the most obvious thing to do. Eliza put her suggestion to the U.S. Army Superintendent of the Office of Public Buildings and Grounds. Yeah, imagine trying to fit that job title on a name tag at your next networking event. Anyway, the superintendent said no, but here's the beauty of persistence. Eliza continued to make the suggestion to every single superintendent for 24 years. In the end, it wasn't really the superintendent who was the most important person in the decision, because in 1908, Eliza found support among fellow flowering cherry enthusiasts, Dr. and Mrs. Fairchild, who donated saplings to the area schools for Arbor Day. With a plan in mind, Eliza decided to start fundraising for the project, and in 1909, she wrote to the First Lady, Helen Taft, asking for support in planting flowering cherries in Potomac Park. Within days, Mrs. Taft wrote back, offering her support. It turns out she had actually lived in Japan and knew firsthand how beautiful the trees were. Here's where it gets wild. The day after Mrs. Taft lent her support, the Japanese consul in New York heard about the plan and asked Mrs. Taft if she would accept a gift of 2,000 trees in the name of the city of Tokyo. Imagine that. The time for Eliza's idea had truly come. Mrs. Taft asked the superintendent to plant some trees, and within 5 days, he had ordered 90 trees of the Shirafugan variety from a nursery in Pennsylvania. The intended gift of trees from Tokyo took a little longer to plant than expected, because the first shipment of trees was found to be infested with pests. A second shipment of 3,000 trees arrived in 1912, and Mrs. Taft herself helped plant 2 Yoshino trees along the Tidal Basin. This shipment contained 11 different varieties, including Yoshino and Kwanzan. I've been lucky enough to see the cherries in bloom at the Tidal Basin, and it is definitely an experience I'd recommend if you're ever in Washington, D.C. in early April. The scene is bucolic, peaceful, and radiant, as if you're not just a stone's throw away from the incessant traffic of the city. The thing that makes the view so striking is that the flowers themselves are on full display. The trees bloom before they leaf out, so there are no leaves covering the flowers from any angle. Add to that that the tendency of the trees to be covered in clusters of pink or white blooms all along their branches, and then group thousands of those trees together along the edge of the tidal basin, and you have the makings of an epic vista. One that Eliza Scidmore believed in so strongly, she spent nearly 30 years working to create it. Because I'm familiar with the gift of the trees from their homeland, I've always seen the flowering cherry as a symbol of friendship, and I think I'm not alone in that among Americans. Looking deeper, in its native Japan, flowering cherry can be seen as a symbol of the fleeting beauty of life, since each flower only lasts a few days, in spite of the intensity of its show. Because I'm not familiar with their native environment, I was very grateful to find a gem of a book by Y.B. Quittert called Japanese Flowering Cherries. It's a deep dive worth reading for any plant lover who wants to geek out on flowering cherries. To simplify things, there are 7 species of flowering cherry native to Japan, and they have been prized as ornamentals for hundreds of years. Many of them grow wild in the hills and mountains, with some species preferring the sparser soils of the ridge tops, while most of the ones that became parents of the garden cultivars prefer the richer soils found further down the slopes. For centuries, people would select a tree they liked from the wild and transplant it to their own garden, resulting in a huge number of cultivars to be found in Japan. In the nursery trade, here in the States at least, a handful have been especially popular, and if you're looking for a tree to plant in your garden, Yoshino and Kwanzan are still among the varieties you're most likely to find available at your local nursery. They like full sun and well-drained soil, and depending on the variety, they can grow from, say, 15 feet tall up to about 40 feet. If your spot would work well for crab apples, it would probably do for flowering cherries too. Like all of the spring flowering trees, it helps us mark the transition from one season to another. It announces that spring is well and truly here, and reminds us that when we're willing to pay attention and live in the moment, there are spectacular things to experience in every season, no matter how fleeting. Thank you for joining me on this journey back to nature with Plant Connection. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to tap subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss the next episode. See you next time.